While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. We've all heard the euphemism about knowledge being power, but perhaps the more accurate assessment comes from my favorite childhood cartoon. Yes, I've referenced it before, but when G.I. Joe signed off each episode by letting us know that knowing is half the battle, Duke and his crew are echoing the same sentiment as our guest for today's episode. Evan Dornbush is the CEO of Desired Effect. A former DoD-trained state hacker, he's now working with cyber researchers to help promote their findings and get the vulnerabilities they detect into the hands of the software, network, or equipment suppliers before hackers can leverage these findings and wreak havoc on industrial control systems and production workflows. The approach underscores a number of the challenges facing industrial cybersecurity, such as who will take the lead in secure by design initiatives, how to develop ROI statements to help illustrate the need for cyber expenditures, and the ongoing need to continue developing internal cyber talent. With new technology and greater levels of connectivity expanding the industrial attack landscape daily, finding solutions to these problems will demand new perspectives. Here to offer a couple such viewpoints is Evan Dornbush. So, Evan, thanks so much for joining us today and welcome to Security Breach.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff.
Absolutely. So let's dig right into it right away here. In the industrial sector, we've got tons of different vulnerabilities that are popping up. They continue to be persistent. We get a bunch of advisories from CISA and other CVEs that continue to be added to different databases. When you look at this particular area, when you look at the industrial sector and manufacturing, what do you see as some of the bigger vulnerabilities that we continue to see, and why do you think they continue to be such reoccurring issues?
Maybe it's less about the actual weaknesses that seem to emerge over time and more about the conditions that create those weaknesses or any weaknesses. The way that I think about the market, it seems like there are probably two driving factors that lead to that kind of persistence. The first is commodity offerings. I think when competition is fierce and manufacturers are faced with smaller margins, a lot of those companies make up for it by reducing overhead cost, right? You go to any supply store, even for commodity commercial equipment, and what used to be specialized hardware, niche appliances, everything's kind of converged. And you go to Best Buy or Micro Center, and switches are firewalls, are routers, are wireless, and they're all like $50. And so I think companies that face that pressure, a lot of times what they're doing is reducing their senior staff, replacing it with junior staff. And as a result, you lose that body, you lose that QA process. And those are the companies you see over and over again in some of those advisories. And maybe the second condition is maybe the same thing, but maybe from a different perspective. I think companies that are racing the calendar, right? Build fast, release it now, fix it later. Those companies have made the business decision to forgo investment in the design process and the QA process. And as a result, I think, things get to market and there's just this gap between what you expect when you purchase a thing and then what you're actually receiving. And honestly, that's where the entire cybersecurity industry sits. It's like fill that gap.
Yeah. No, it makes sense, especially when we look at this age of Industry 4.0 and everybody wants these new technologies out in the market more quickly. Product demand is high, life cycles are shorter, all those things you definitely can see leading to some missed opportunities for the suppliers in helping out their customers. Makes a lot of sense. And one of the things too that we run into in the industrial sector is the common sense response to a lot of these vulnerabilities is to patch. Well, patching in manufacturing is tough because you're looking at possibly shutting things down, taking it offline. Uptime is sacrificed, and downtime is just the absolute enemy of productivity. What have you seen, Evan, in terms of best practices maybe to approaching the patching dynamic when it comes to some of these vulnerabilities?
Actually, I'll take a completely different stance. I don't necessarily know that I have solid advice on patch strategy. I think there's a whole sub industry of experts, in the vulnerability management space that provide maybe guidance on patch prioritization for public bugs. So maybe we can defer there. But the company that I formed, Desired Effect, we're actually quite different. We focus specifically on bugs for which no patch exists yet. And our thesis is that those bugs are the most dangerous, where you see downtime in production lines. And when the attackers have the knowledge but defenders don't, that's the most dangerous scenario. So we've chosen to focus our attention there. And how we do that, I think there's three different levels of service where we can provide value in risk mitigation. I think at the most basic level, we can provide our clients with just raw knowledge that there's a vulnerability that exists for a product that you own or operate. And that awareness and visibility, I think, helps plan and posture a little bit. At the next level, we provide them with threat hunting guides for their technical team, right? The things an owner or operator can take those steps to see if their systems have already been breached by that bug. The earliest possible monitoring and response, and in some cases, the ability to reconfigure things without having to necessarily pull them offline. Like you said, downtime is a killer in environments. So that's we help in that area. And then I think at the highest level, maybe the most provocative thing we do for the most proactive steps for the defenders is we offer them the ability to work with the vulnerability research community, those individuals that are finding these bugs in the first place, and enabling them to acquire the intellectual property rights, which essentially removes them from circulation and prevents attackers from getting them. We believe that is the defender's greatest possible step in preventing exploitation from 0 days.
Yeah, I want to get into the 0 days and your approach in working with the researchers. It's very interesting. It's a little bit different than what some other folks are doing. Maybe you could dive into that a little bit and talk to us how you have this relationship with the researchers and what that allows you to do.
Yeah, we are a marketplace, right? I think it's fruitless for the defenders and business owners to continue to try and fight this with increasing technology. You're adding cost, you're adding downtime, you're adding attack surface in certain areas, and hackers are really good at breaking technology, and so more technology is not going to solve this problem. Like the reason why individuals tinker in this manner is because it can be very profitable. And so what we're trying to do is provide organizations with a completely different approach, which is instead of investing in more products and more services that convolute everything and only increase your costs, what if we had a non-criminal avenue where researchers can be engaged by defenders, not necessarily criminals, and participate in an open exchange in an economic model where, again, defenders now have access to the same information, if not at the same time than before criminals had access to it. You can actually be much more. It's an ounce of prevention, pound of cure kind of situation. Huge net positive for all of us, and allows us to finally shift from reactive panic mode to something that's a little bit more proactive and calculated.
So are you typically working with the end user or the companies that are producing the products that are being put into plant floors all over the country?
Yeah, really good question. The way we see it is manufacturers have advocacy already, right? They have this concept of vulnerability disclosure programs. Those are often outsourced to third-party bug bounty programs. And the deck is really stacked against the researcher. The researcher who finds the flaw goes into a program and is essentially just outclassed and outmaneuvered, right? Timmy is not going to be able to go to Microsoft and say, here's what I've got. It's really important. Microsoft has, as an example, right, has an army of lawyers and paperwork and process and experience in negotiating these things. And so a lot of times the researchers don't like that. They don't like approaching the manufacturers for a variety of reasons. Not beholden less on money, but more on, hey, I found a thing, and then now I'm gagged under NDA. It's been a year, the thing hasn't been fixed, and now this company willingly is putting their customers at risk. Owners and operators of the technology have the same risk profile and the same rights to that information. And so that's where we focus our customer base. So if you are, I guess, in industrial scenarios, you're reliant on technology, right? And again, as I said earlier, there's a huge gap between what you thought you bought and what you actually received. And so what we do is we provide anyone that has a reliance on a particular piece of technology, right? For better or for worse, this is what we've got, and we need uptime and we need full understanding of the risks in which this thing operates. We provide those owners and operators with the same ability as the vendors themselves to go out and engage the research community and be brought to them. Hey, here's the risk that your technology stack currently faces.
Oh, very interesting. And I think this leads into a big conversation that we have in the industrial side all the time, which is secure by design, in terms of where does that onus really lie? You know, the folks on the plant floors, the buyers of this technology are saying we need help from the suppliers. The suppliers are saying that's more on the end users. I'd really kind of be interested in your take in terms of how can we get better there? Where does the onus lie? How do we really leverage all of this research that's going on for both sides?
Yeah, I think it's communication, and again, that's what our company is trying to impart, where it doesn't previously exist. Right, there has been for years just tremendous distrust between the manufacturers and the researchers, and we've come a long way, but that conversation is still really niche and really esoteric. And if we're looking at this in a battlefield, right, we're looking at this as our livelihood, right? You know, if a manufacturing plant has to turn off for reasons, or the supply chain gets messed up and I can't stock my shelves, or my check-in system isn't working and I can't cater to my clientele, those are really, really bad days. And if the only approach is to sit and wait for the vendor to get their act together and for a patch to roll out and then for me to test that patch and like that, you're already 10 steps behind. And this is why cybersecurity teams and professionals talk about burnout, and it doesn't have to be this way, right? I think the cleaner approach is, hey, the researcher who finds the thing wants to do good in the world. We should honor and respect that, bring them into the conversation and let them participate in the modern economy. And in doing so, all of us are safer. We all have access to the same information at the same time. There's never an asymmetry where the attackers get first crack at this data because they're the only ones that are valuing it monetarily. And then you, with all of your investments in products and services, are completely blind anyway. Like all those investments become useless in a 0-day situation.
No, very interesting. I mean, when you talk about that communication dynamic, we see this in a lot of different areas when it comes to cybersecurity conversations, but looking specifically at the researchers and the suppliers, is this just a turf war thing? Is this the suppliers not liking the researchers, sort of, you know, looking around at things going on in their backyard? Or why is there such a resistance potentially between these two in terms of sharing information, I guess?
It's a really interesting question. And I'm struggling to try and figure out like a real concise answer to it. I think there's definitely a disconnect where, you know, in the minds of a lot of people, like you've got this like 18-year-old kid in the basement and they find this like flaw in like some flagship product from a very large multinational, and then they go and do crime. And a lot of times it doesn't work that way. I think what you have is teams of individuals that are curious. They buy a thing and they pick it apart just to see how it really works for whatever their motivation is. That research is different from the person that's going to use it. So there's definitely, in my view, a complete distinction between the person that finds the bug and then, if you're thinking about it from a cybercrime lens, the person that uses it. The problem is cyber criminals, again, they're not creating this stuff. They're not discovering it. They're not necessarily doing the research. Very few criminal gangs have a research capacity. They're buying this stuff. And if you look at it from like supply and demand, they're buying it for cheap because the buying pool is so limited. It's really limited just to criminals and maybe some government groups. And so you have the situation where a researcher who finds a thing wants to go forwards and say, hey, vendor, here's the thing, I found it, it's really cool, we should talk about it, I can do a talk at or publish a paper, and the vendor feels very threatened because it hits to their brand, and so they slap all these cease and desists and these EULA violations, and like there's so much distrust there that the only way that a researcher can monetize is by working with somebody, who says, look, I'm going to give you a briefcase full of money and just don't ask too many questions. And that's how these things end up in the hands of bad guys. And that's really silly. I think there's more money, there's more people, there's more interest on the defensive side, but there hasn't been a conduit to, again, celebrate and appreciate the fact that these researchers, they're not creating the risk. They didn't produce the product. The product just has a flaw. And the researchers are just through experimentation and just brilliant minds able to find a way to put that device in an operating state that the manufacturer just never intended. And, I'm not saying vendors are sloppy or bad. I mean, there's always going to be overlooked scenarios. And we should, again, be thankful that somebody found it and we can all improve. And so, again, part of what we're trying to do is say, look, this is not, desired effect, we're not a technology company, we're a marketplace, because it's an economic problem and we need to solve it with an economic based solution. We can't keep out teching this. The more whiz bang stuff that we buy in front of, we've got our routers, and there are firewalls for our routers, and there are firewalls for our firewalls, and then our monitoring, there's so much stuff that even if you have a pretty good security budget, your team can't possibly operate all of that investment to its full potential. It's too complex, and we have to simplify. And to me, the easiest way to simplify to get defenders not 10 steps behind the criminals is to have them work through us with the research community that's finding these flaws in the first place.
No, it makes a ton of sense. And we do have this issue in cybersecurity, whether it's industrial or other sectors, where it's almost just a resistance to acknowledging that there might be some problems. It's really strange because we want to solve this stuff. We want to prevent it from happening, but we're afraid to look under the hood a little bit or listen to people outside of the normal community or realm that you're used to getting information from. And I think that bleeds into a lot of other conversations with cybersecurity in terms of how the bad guys are even using more than just these exploits, but the technology that they can use to take advantage of these exploits. AI comes to mind. There's others as well. But I was wondering if you could maybe dive into how this is sort of a chain effect. We start with understanding what's wrong, and then that leads into the bad guys getting ahead of us from a technological perspective as well. And we're just constantly playing catch up.
We'll be back after a quick break.
With the holidays coming, also come scammers.
Ma'am, but we suspect there's going to be more fraud on your account.
I'm Michelle Bousquet, a cybersecurity teacher who loves to spread the word about hacks and scams.
Facebook users are exposed to over 22 billion scam
On the
posts.
How Hacks Happen podcast, I cover scams and hacks in everyday language, explaining how they work under the hood.
Let's talk about the scam from start to finish. It all starts with an invoice.
That's How Hacks Happen. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, again, I think catch up is a horrible approach for any organization. You can't plan. It's very hard to have contingency, and you don't know your ROI on your investments. And so the idea that a defender has to be 10 steps behind, like, I just challenge the premise of your question, Jeff. Like, and again, I'm putting my whole business at stake on this, because again, I think what has happened historically is attackers will purchase this information and this tooling, and it gives them a perpetual and unfair advantage. Defenders are always 10 steps behind. They've spent all this money on all of this tech, and none of it actually works when you need it most, because it's not tuned for the thing that is unknown. And so the solution that we feel is, hey, it's kind of out there, it's a little bit different, but if you're tired of being 10 steps behind, don't, right? You know your tech stack, you know where your critical business lines are, you know where your crown jewel technology is, and what's going to produce the worst day for you. So having the ability to have some economic factors in on this and to engage with the community that's able to pick apart these flaws, like that's when they're most dangerous, but that's also when you have the most ability to do something about it. It's, these exploits, we track the marketplace. That's what we do. And so we have pretty good analytics on the landscape. And, you're seeing bugs going for, let's just say, I'm making up numbers at this point, but like $20,000 for some threat actor group to purchase some kind of capability, and then they go and turn it around for a $2 million ransom. Like, that's why they're doing this. The defenders are sitting around saying, like, I'll just wait for the $2 million ransom and hope it's only 2 and not 10. That's a horrible approach. It's just, it's not good.
No. Well, and I'm going to ask, this is a tough one. Okay, I know there's no silver bullets for this one, but for a lot of this, it feels just like a cultural issue. And we have cultural issues within cybersecurity in terms of championing the need to make these investments and do it the right way and trying to get ahead of things. And that's very difficult when you're looking at an organization that is all about getting product out the door. Cybersecurity, in a lot of ways, it slows all that down. Doesn't mean it's not important, but it's getting a different mindset and approaching cybersecurity as an operational tool, not something that is a hindrance to getting things done. What have you experienced, or could you offer some guidance in terms of ways to shift this mindset a little bit, or offer some things for those cybersecurity champions out there to say to people further up the food chain to get them on board with what they're trying to do here?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer this question as a prediction. And so keep me honest here if I'm not answering your question, kind of dig back. But if we look at cybersecurity, right, it is an investment. It is a cost. It is not going to drive bottom line 9 times out of 10 unless you have a really sharp operating team. And so you always have to come at it from the position of, I'm trying to manage and reduce risk. I will never control it. That's just a paradigm of being in cybersecurity, right? When we look at cybersecurity spend, I think we've had like two paradigms, right? I think we started with, hey, the cybersecurity nerds, like, hey, boss, like, we need to invest in all this stuff. And it was like, no, we're not going to do any of this. This is silly, right? And then we started seeing some of these catastrophic breaches where in some cases companies were shutting down, although I think that's more of a scare tactic from the industry than anything else. But you're seeing, Jaguar got hit and they couldn't make cars, right? And M&S got hit and they couldn't, put food on the shelves, and hotel chains that couldn't, again, check in clients. That impacts the bottom dollar. And so you see a complete shift of like, oh, you want a thing, just go get it, right? Now I think we've bought all the stuff and we're still no longer outpacing the attackers, right? The groups that I just mentioned, right? The Jaguar and MGM, the hotel, and M&S, the food chain, the food grocery supplier, those are all hit by the same threat actor group. And that group is notoriously young, right? So like a bunch of 17-year-olds are taking down these 100-year-old companies with millions of dollars and a global footprint. It's pretty telling that cybersecurity as an industry is not actually meeting the mark. And so I predict that in the future, and in very near future, anyone that's going to want to purchase some new cybersecurity thing has to speak board speak. They have to understand ROI. They have to understand specific dollars. And why I'm bullish on my own company is we get to do that. I can say, look, this bug is going to cost you this, but the impact of getting hit by it is going to be that. And if the math works out, then you buy the bug and you be proactive and preventative. It's a lot harder if you're a widget manufacturer, right? To say like, I got a firewall, and there's a new model, and the new model has like, I don't know, a larger hard drive and a little bit extra RAM, and the processor works, 20%. Like, what does that translate to in dollars? I don't know. I'll probably just keep using the one that I've got, right? And that in and of itself produces risk, right? Because things get end of life, things get obsolete, and they no longer get supported, which does introduce risk. But you have to be able to make the business determination that if I spend $1 here, here's how much I'm going to be getting ahead of down the road. And any security vendor that can't figure out that conversation is going to have a hard time in business.
Yeah. Well, I think it's internally at a lot of manufacturers having that conversation as well. It's easy to be passionate about cybersecurity and understanding that, but then translating that to the financial perspective and helping really to deliver that ROI statement that does help get things sold, if you will, to those with the purse strings. So that makes a lot of sense.
I get it. We read about Salt Typhoon over the summer, hitting all the telecoms, and, a telecom that installed, a network of switches and routers to, let everyone from their homes and businesses connect to the internet and exchange and do things, right? If I am going as the cybersecurity guy saying, look, like all this stuff is really old, we have to like rip and replace all of it. That is expensive. And how do you recoup those costs? I mean, if you're replacing one switch with another, you're still providing internet. You haven't changed anything. So if you're not budgeting for that tech debt, I mean, businesses make this decision, all shapes and sizes and industries. You have to come to those calculations, and it's not unreasonable for the telecoms or others to say, look, I've had this thing and I don't see the advantage in upgrading. And again, that introduces risk, but it's calculated risk.
Well, according to what a lot you've been saying too, that upgrade may not be taking into account all of the potential vulnerabilities that are out there if they're not having these open conversations with the researchers, which is what you're trying to champion here. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. A lot of our customers specifically come to us and say, look, we have to use this thing, this mainframe system, this thing where the vendor's gone out of business or the product is end of life for reasons. And again, I don't need to question those reasons. You've come to me and said you have a challenge. What can I do for you is I can give you that awareness. I can say, look, this product, there are no vendor patches coming. So that whole patch management strategy doesn't matter because the product is just not supported. Or the original equipment creator is just out of business. But we can provide you with awareness and steps that can be taken to make sure that in the event of a discovery that you can be best postured to mitigate and detect. I think there's another element to that where sometimes our customers come to us and say, hey, look, can you proactively go out and ask the research community to dig into this product? Oh, yeah. Because we want to know and we need to know. And, if this special purpose device goes down, like, I don't know, our whole business relies on slot machines, right? So if the slot machine goes down, we're not making money or what have you. And so the ability to anonymously, and anonymous is key, because you don't necessarily want to announce to the world, hey, this is our company, this is our network map, this is the technology we rely on. Yeah. That introduces risk. And with a lot of our competitors, you have to do that. Even under NDA, that still sounds really risky to me. But with us, there's an anonymous factor to it. But being able to, again, engage, make it a bi-directional conversation, even through a proxy, ultimately makes us all safer.
Yeah. No, it makes a ton of sense. I'm curious, you referenced the Jaguar Land Rover hack, which is one that we've been covering a lot. I don't know if it's been officially linked to Scattered Spider, but I think that's sort of the feeling in terms of who's behind that. And they've been very high profile group involved in a lot of different things, right, recently. When it comes to the attack landscape a little bit, are you seeing, I guess that maybe the folks that you want researchers to work less with, do they tend to be ransomware as a service type groups? Are they nation states? Is there a theme that you can kind of point to in terms of how we're essentially trying to draw business away from and funnel it more to the good guys?
Good guys is subjective. And so I think it is important to recognize that there's a global landscape of researchers. There are smart people on every corner of the earth, and whom those researchers want to do business with can vary, right? Everyone has different versions of good and bad. We work with researchers that want to make sure their stuff only goes to the government and never to a private group that could produce spyware or something. Or we've got some researchers that only want to work with specific governments, or some that only want to work with commercial pen test, shops. And it just depends. But again, I think there's nothing out there right now that takes those wants and considerations into, it takes them into consideration. And so we've built a researcher first platform that allows the researchers to say, essentially, here's what I'm looking for. Here's how I'm thinking about my intellectual property, and come at them from a perspective of, look, you're not a criminal. You're not a pariah. This is a business conversation. You have intellectual property. I would benefit from it. We both want to do work together. Let's come out to contractual terms. And I think that's where we're at. Governments used to, I started my career in the United States Department of Defense in the intel community. And we used to never admit that we were even doing cyber operations. And now we have a cyber command, right? So there's absolutely a well-published strategic benefit to engaging in cyber operations, in offensive operations. And the big thing that's going to get everyone to that next hump of maturity is, again, it goes back to communication. There are multiple stakeholders. You have the researchers, you've got the manufacturers, you've got the consumers, you've got the law enforcement, and it operating in the shadows no longer makes sense. It no longer works. And so producing a vibrant marketplace where everyone can look at it and say, here's what needs to happen. Again, I think in the long run, it makes us all safer.
No, makes sense. One of the things I want to circle back a little bit earlier in the interview, you kind of mentioned that a lot of organizations aren't investing in talent, either whether it's retaining good people who understand the threat landscape as well as their own internal operational landscape. And it's a problem that permeates throughout the industry in terms of finding those good people, keeping those good people, training those types of individuals. What have you seen? Maybe it's at an operational level, an organizational level, or just in the wild in terms of finding and keeping those quality cybersecurity folks?
And there's so many ways to answer that question. I think as we record in 2025, I think we're absolutely seeing massive layoffs of anyone and everyone in the space, right? Because again, people are just nervous about the economy, and the first thing that goes is anything that's not producing bottom line. And so a young person that's listening to this show right now, be mindful of that, right? Don't pigeon. I would advise you as just career counseling, like don't pigeonhole yourself into security, because it's a very flowy,
Sure.
ups and downs, feast or famine kind of industry. Go study something like network design, and then you can apply that through network security. But with being a proficient operator of some piece of technology, there's just more job opportunities. For the businesses, I mean, it's really hard from the outside to point fingers and say what they should and shouldn't do. Clearly, I represent the cybersecurity industry, and I want people to at least consider the cost benefit. And I think it pans out more than it doesn't, right? I think the largest corporations are the ones that you see, generally speaking, not getting hit the most because they invest in cybersecurity. I think the companies that don't invest in cybersecurity they're just way more exposed. And so whether that's an in-house team, whether you're partnering with a third-party provider, some subject matter experts, just inviting some nerd to talk to your board once a quarter about stuff without even dictating policy. I think that we're there. I think we're finally starting to get it. Cyber insurance is not paying out dollar for dollar, so there's risk in that. Board members are now reading the headlines and seeing, again, larger companies or competitive companies are getting hit more and more frequently, particularly with 0 days, and it's something that they need to pay attention to. And keeping your head in the sand is not a viable strategy. And so if you don't have someone that you trust in your corner, it's really hard to make the right decisions. And so, trending in terms of employment, ups and downs, I think those are all temporal, but the companies that invest in cybersecurity the right way are going to have the better outcomes, in my opinion.
So even when you're looking to fill some of these gaps, if you are looking to hire, even looking with some of those related skills, you mentioned network construction and creation, maybe you can reverse engineer that a little bit and bring those folks along to understand your environment and the cybersecurity needs.
Oh, 100%. I think, we used to have this not even a concept, but like, if you are a nation state hacker, which we read about in the papers, and I was one, a long time ago, but that's kind of where I started. You are essentially a system administrator. That's what you're doing. You're going from one machine to another and remotely managing it. You're just doing it with some special tools where hopefully the owner of that system doesn't, they're just not aware to your presence. But if you don't have a fundamental understanding of how machines talk to each other, how information gets transformed and flows, how cryptography, what it does and doesn't do, and how some of these widgets impact some of the data flow and data processing, it's really hard to be good at that kind of a job. And so if like being a red team pen tester, is something of interest to you, learn the legitimate way of managing a system, right? Become certified on, Cisco has a pretty extensive certification program, Red Hat, Microsoft, they've done a really good job of professionalizing the ability to become experts at a particular technology or a class of technology. And then you study and learn like other ways of doing the same thing, right? Because at the end of the day, you're just talking about moving information, files, packets from one thing to another, and then doing stuff with it. And so, yeah, the biggest way I think to just have success in any industry is to like generalize and then focus in on what it is you want to do. So
interesting. Well, I can't let it just pass. You said you got started as sort of a nation state hacker. Was that part of the DoD thing, or was that before that?
Yeah, I just was in the right place at the right time. But after college, I got recruited into the Intel community, and while there, I got placed in an office that I think my job title was computer network operator, which again is like remotely administering computers, hoping that other people don't kind of see what you're doing. Great experience. Actually, how it translates into what I'm doing today is flexibility. So there was a time when this is showing my age a little bit, but things started getting smart. You have the smart thermostat, the smart elevator, the smartphone, the smart printer, and like they're all special purpose devices, but they're all in common, an operating system, a network card, and some memory. And for good reasons, the United States Defense Department does not allow radio devices into secure facilities because the fear of transmitting out to eavesdroppers. Well, that becomes really hard to do research on these devices when everything has multiple radios in them. And so a bunch of friends and I, we left government service and literally set up shop in the parking lot of a mall where we could walk to the Apple store and we could walk to the Best Buy and whatever and obtain these things and then just pick them apart and then perform research on them and kind of license out that research. And that experience, both in civilian service and then commercializing the research aspects, have really led me to where I'm at today with Desired Effect.
Interesting. Yeah, it's always crazy to see how people get started and where they end up. So very interesting. Wrapping things up, this has been awesome, Evan. Really appreciate your take on a lot of these different topics. As we look ahead a little bit, are there different trends, technologies, things that you see could really have an impact over the next year and a half? I mean, we haven't talked about artificial intelligence yet. Maybe we can touch on that or other things that you see kind of going on.
Yeah, totally fair. I'm truly betting on this, right? I formed Desired Effect, and I'm putting in, blood, sweat, and tears in my conviction. I think on your question, in the near future, I see two trends continuing. First, we will definitely see the number of zero-day discoveries continuing to increase. This is a problem. It is a problem that is getting worse, not better. You can look this up pretty easily. Zero-day exploits are tracked by a unique identifier called CVEs, and the number of CVEs is increasing year over year. The second thing that I think we're going to see in the near future is the number of attacks that are using 0 days for initial access will also increase. I think phishing is by far and large a solved problem. Like if you have the budget, there are tools that can handle that. Identity is, again, it's a problem, but there are really good solutions on the market that solve it. And some of the other access mechanisms, there is some good solutioning in place for that. But we're seeing, I think Verizon, they have their DBIR annual report on like the state of like hacking, and they've shown a 300% increase year over year for the last 2 years. On the use of 0 days, because again, it makes all of that technology investment completely useless. Why I think we're going to see more 0-day usage and more 0-day discovery maybe touches on your teaser there, Jeff, of AI, and probably not because of AI itself. I think two things are happening in the business world. First, I think businesses are shifting responsibilities from human experts to immature software. And again, not just in cybersecurity, we've talked about this on today's show, but in a lot of areas, we're seeing layoffs. We're seeing layoffs in development, in design, in quality control, and it's being replaced with vibe coding. And those are not slow; those are happening very, very quickly. And so, as a result, I think we're going to see a lot of sloppy product development and a lot of sloppy product release in the near future. Right? It's temporal. Vibe coding, the technology will get better. Some of the people that were laid off will get rehired. Like it'll balance out, but in the near future, I think it's going to be really ugly. And so I think the biggest risk to the organization right now is just reliance on technology that's, I don't know, built in a manner that just forgoes the design, the compilation, the testing, all that without security in mind. So,
no, that's one of the big challenges we have in terms of keeping pace. Operational technology, I've heard a lot of people refer to OT as old technology with the legacy dynamic there and really understanding the new threat landscape, which again brings us right back to what we've been talking about with really leveraging all this research that's out there and putting it ahead of what we're trying to do and staying ahead of the bad guys. So, good stuff. Evan, anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
No, thank you for the opportunity, Jeff. Really appreciate your time.
Excellent. If people want to find out a little bit more about Desired Effect, where should we send them?
Yeah, desiredeffect.io is our website. We've got newsletters. If you're a researcher, you can subscribe, and every month we'll send you that research topic list of where all our clients are saying that they're interested in certain topics. If you're interested in understanding a little bit more about what we do and how we can help you, there's a contact us forum. I'm pretty approachable, very active on LinkedIn, so just happy to help out any way I can.
Thanks, Evan, and thank you for joining us today. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore in Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Evan Dornbush, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.